All right, everybody, welcome to the Smarter Sculpted Physique podcast. And today, my guest is the one and only Lee Boyce. So, for those of you who don't know Supertrainer Lee Boyce, I can't list everywhere he's appeared because it would take the whole podcast to do that. But let's see: Muscle and Fitness, Men's Health, Men's Fitness, T Nation, Stack, Men's Journal, Esquire magazine, believe it or not, Shape, Oxygen, Arnold Schwarzenegger Media, ABC News Radio, the Wall Street Journal, as a matter of fact, and Huffington Post, and so much more. I've seen a lot of you on local TV news stations, et cetera, in the Toronto area. So, welcome to the Smarter Sculpted Physique podcast, my man.
Thanks a
Thank
lot. I'm glad to be on.
So one of the things I almost feel like I should apologize because for months and months, maybe even a year or two, people have been saying, you got to get this Lee Boyce guy on your podcast because you guys speak the same language. It's almost like you're one person. You say the same things over and over. And I was like, oh, okay. So it took me a long time to get around to it, but here we are. So what I wanted, and happy Canada Day, by the way. By the time this posts, people don't realize it's a holiday here. So thanks for making time on a holiday.
I didn't even realize that you were also Canadian as well. So that's pretty cool.
Well, that was my first question is why do you think on a per population per capita basis that Canadians, yourself, and me, and Christian Thibodeau, and people before that, I mean, we really are sort of taking up a lot of the territory in terms of expertise when it comes to training. I can think of a whole bunch of others. What do you have any notions on why you think that may be?
Mm, I'm not 100% sure. I think that the saturation in certain parts of Canada is very, very high with regards to the amount of trainers that there are. Like Toronto's super dense for trainers. Every corner you turn, there's a trainer, especially in the downtown core. But then there are other areas that are sort of like, I guess you want to call them up and coming. So like provinces like the Albertas and the BCs and the provinces out east as well. That you're starting to get a more access to great knowledge or great information, and so trainers are getting better and getting access to these resources. And because there aren't as dense amounts of trainers out there, all of a sudden they rise up, and it's a great thing because it's improving the knowledge overall.
But there's a lot of copycat stuff out there as well, right? Where they really don't have a grasp of the knowledge. They're just monkey see, monkey do. Do you see a lot of that?
Yeah, no. So definitely, there's a fair amount of that, especially in a city like mine, where there are so many people and there's so much demand for personal training and so on. People will see what one person's doing and then start mimicking it, or make it appear as though there's some kind of a programming. Very athletic-based in-season style training is something that's very trendy. I don't know about elsewhere, but here right now, there's a whole lot of that you see going on with general population clientele. And it's stuff that might be a little bit too advanced for them and so on. But that's what a lot of trainers feel nice doing. So that's what they put their clients through. And sometimes it's a little bit redundant, and it doesn't really give them what they need.
And that's key. I was going to ask you, like, one of the things I was going to say is let's pretend we're just sitting in the bar at Boston Pizza or something and bending our elbows over a couple frosty ones and getting you to sort of tell me what the number one thing is that really sort of makes you shake your head and in frustration that you just can't get across to people that you wish you could. And it's, I think, kind of along these lines, but what pops into your head when I present that to you?
There are a lot of things actually. As far as career development goes, there's a real attachment to social media, and when it comes to the amount of followers, which is a word I don't really like to use, but the amount of followers that you use to sort of justify your relevancy as a coach or as a trainer, and I just think about how many of these people would fall off in terms of their careers if Instagram was to disappear tomorrow, or Facebook and Twitter were to disappear tomorrow. A lot of these people are very, very conjoined to the idea of having a social media audience and so on. And if they don't have it, then all of a sudden nobody really knows or cares who they are anymore. So the footprint that you leave on the industry has to come from more than just the things that you do on social media or the things you do for social media. And, there are a lot of careers that are seeming to be built around getting a great body and doing flashy exercises for the sake of your audience. And that's not the best way to go about it for a sustainability perspective.
Yeah, I have a real frustration with social media as well. I came up with this quote actually this morning, and it's a little harsh, but I think it's true regarding social media. I think the way I put it is ownership on social media belongs to really dumb people. Smart people can only rent space there.
Hmm.
So I don't know how you feel about that. Is a little too harsh or not, but
Hey, cold hard facts is the blunt truth, and I hear exactly what you're saying. Because the truth of the matter is, when you have a busy business that you're running, and you have a lot of clients that you have to deal with in person, and you're trying to hone your skills outside, and you're trying to develop yourself as far as getting your own training in for one, but also from an educational perspective, where you are working with other coaches, or you're trying to be coached yourself, or shadowing or mentorship, or presentations or attending seminars. All those things are going to take up a whole lot of your time, and a lot of people who spend their lives living on social media, it makes you wonder just how many hours in the day they have to actually practice their craft. So outside of actually working out and filming that, what other things are you showing that show that you're actually leaving a footprint or some kind of a mark on the industry for the better? And again, a lot of people that I can think of would fall right off if the social media aspect was not a part of things, and all of a sudden you're just sort of sanctioned into irrelevancy as a trainer.
yeah, a lot of the way people presented it to me is if 90% of these people had to actually present at a conference, you would find out right away how little they actually know because they can't back anything up other than copying what some other expert has said, and then they're left with a question they can't answer or something like that. So
Yeah, I have to digress by saying this though, is that people like you and I believe that we try to go the education route. We try to go the route where we're influencing people in that regard, where we're making trainers better, we're making clients better, and understand and develop even a little bit of autonomy with their own training, so that they don't have to rely on a personal trainer for years and years and years and so on, so they can actually get better. Now, I do think that there is a place and there is a need for the social media type of person who is more geared towards, whether it's fitness inspiration and that whole Fitspo kind of content and all that sort of stuff too. I believe there's a place for that. I just think that the thing that frustrates me or that insults me the most is when the average person will go and take a look at the Fitspo person and then take a look at somebody like myself or somebody like yourself or someone else who's very influential and think that we're kind of in the same vein, or think that we're kind of like, I don't want to say on the same level, but we have the same footprint or mark that we're going to be leaving on the industry when it's all said and done, right? There's a lot more substance to a career that's based around actually bringing up other professionals, and that's based around actually making clients better, versus somebody who's just motivating and really putting themselves on showcase for one real purpose, and that's basically it. So I do see the good side of it, but it does frustrate me a little bit when I see that they're sort of being placed on par with one another.
yeah, I think among consumers, the consumers seem to have the pyramid upside down, whereas the experts have a pyramid where expertise is at the top, and then it filters down to the kind of things you're mentioning that are still relevant, but in a different way. But the
Right.
consumer flips that upside down. So if they see a shiny new object in the form of a funky exercise or funky combination of exercises, they gravitate towards that. Or how many more social insta influencers can we see who are just taking endless pictures of their butts?
Yeah.
And somehow that's supposed to. There's a line from the show Mad Men that I always like. I follow a lot of media just for the writing, the brilliance of writing. And there's a line from Mad Men that goes, yeah, someone who's got 10% of my experience and results, I'm supposed to take seriously because they just suddenly declare themselves to be the competition. And I think that's a good line for experts to keep in mind, because we're getting far too carried away with appearances over substance. Like, I've had some people on my podcast who are brilliant experts at what they talk about, a different sphere of influence than what you and I are talking about, and it's more metabolic, nutritional, and that kind of thing. But because their background isn't in working out, they get trashed regularly because oh, look at that person. He looks like this. He looks like that. It's just like, well, wait a minute. Their background isn't, if a former hockey player becomes a trainer, of which there are many, are we supposed to not take them seriously, their expertise seriously, because they don't have an 18-inch bicep? Like it just, it gets absolutely like insane. I even had some feedback when I had T. Colin Campbell on my podcast. He's in his 80s and he's still writing books, and that's his background is academia. And people were actually commenting, I could never listen to a guy who's got a physique like that. He's in his 80s. What's his physique supposed to look like? Like it's just
Right.
It's unbelievably daunting to try to, in this day and age, come down to the consumer level of how they consume information, right? So I don't know if you have thoughts on that, but go ahead.
I think that there's a line. There is going to be a measure of walking the talk in this industry that I definitely believe in, and that I stand behind, that I try to sort of live up to myself. As far as, as long as you can help it, and as long as you are, a healthy, I would say on the younger side as well, just a physically able person, then you should be doing what you can to physically evidence that you are somebody who is a disciple of his own craft, for lack of a better term.
Sure.
So that means that you should be on top of yourself for training and eating well and doing all those things the best you can to show that you respect your own body and that you're going to treat it as best you can yourself. Now, with that said, how far do people go in one direction or the other, where it's like, okay, this person has a 6-pack and not an 8-pack, so he's not good enough? or is it the opposite, where it's like this person is complete Poindexter looking kind of person, where he has no muscle, pure body fat, like nothing close to an athletic physique whatsoever, but he has his PhD in this, that, and the third? Well, do we raise an eyebrow to that either? So I think that if you are going to take on wear the hat of being somebody who is an expert in any way in the health industry, whether that is as a fitness expert or a nutrition expert or whatnot, it can only add credibility if you do possess a little bit of athleticism to your physique as well, or some form of things that physically evidences that you are involved in healthy, active living. And so, like it's a little bit of a tough one for me to sort of just pass a straight up judgment on, because there are a lot of variables that factor into this. But with all things equal, I'm definitely a proponent of somebody who tries to at least walk the talk,
Yeah, but I'll interrupt you there, because there's so many caveats with that. You can go down certain rabbit holes. There's an old saying, I think, that we're both agree with and would get at, and it's the quotation is, the problem with expertise is it requires near expertise to even recognize it. Because I remember a while back, maybe about a year ago, there was a certain conference being held, and someone sent me the link, like, why aren't you speaking at this conference? And I don't do those anymore anyway, but it caught my eye, experts from sort of my era, right, my age group and stuff. And I looked at the current pictures of them, and they're all in their 50s, like I'm about to turn 58. And it's the opposite of what you said. They practice their craft, and there's no questions they're experts at what they do. There's no, like, that's beyond doubt. But in their late 50s, they don't look the part. I mean, it looked more like a collection of, middle-aged men with paunches at a barbecue, and the funny thing is, to sort of give that some context, at the very same time, there was a nutrition expo going on, plant-based nutrition expo going on, where most of the experts presenting there were in their 50s or later, and they all looked like they should be presenting the Fit Expo. Like they look healthy, their skin's not wrinkled, there's no middle-aged paunches, so I think, it's a rabbit hole amongst consumers that, well, someone should look the part, but bodies change, right? Especially
Sure.
After age 50. So, there's a lot of sort of gray area there that's hard to teach the consumer what an expert actually is. And I've always said an expert is someone who can combine academia with experience in a way that they can present to somebody so it's that knowledge is consumable to them, right? So it's
Right.
not about what you and I know. It's, I've always said at any conference, I don't care if I'm the smartest guy in the room. I just want to be the most effective guy in the room.
Right.
So, the conferences, I don't know how many you've presented at, but the ones I presented at, it was almost like a contest to, when someone got a hold of the microphone, it was a contest to prove who the smartest presenter was, right? And it was like, how does that help the consumer up their game? Like like you said earlier, we should be, like Vern Gambetta said, the role of a good coach is to put himself out of business, to go from guiding light to mirror, being a reflection on the client, to the client no longer needing us, right? So you got thoughts on that? You've already basically commented on it, but go ahead.
Yeah, I've presented at maybe about, I don't know, under 10 conferences so far. I'm still working on that. I'm still getting a little bit more exposure as time goes on with that sort of thing. So with the little bit that I've gotten my feet wet with it, I have noticed that there are definitely, you can see that difference between the people who have real actionable information they want to disseminate and spread to people so that they can actually learn from it and use it and apply it, and people who have a little bit of a different agenda, for lack of a better term. So that agenda might be that they want their product, whatever it is, to be sold. Or that
Yes.
agenda might be that they want to showcase their brainiac knowledge, because that's a big part of it too, is like sort of, I'm going to take an hour to show all of the cool stuff that I've studied and researched and so on, but there's not going to be too much takeaway from it. It's just a showcase of my skills, and that's basically it. And I don't know. I tried to learn from the good and bad sides of it, because there's some presentations that I can think of that are just like memorable, and
Yeah.
that's what I'd like to try to deliver myself, is something that people can actually walk away from saying, well, okay, I'm going to go and I'm going to teach my clients exactly this stuff. I'm going to go and I'm going to do this for myself exactly the way that it was shown, and there's actually some benefit out of it. So yeah, there's definitely both sides of that, and I don't really like the idea of a person who might be a trainer themselves, or a person who might be just a fitness enthusiast, who goes and they pay a lot of money to go and attend these conferences that contain symposiums of speakers and so on. And at the end of the day, if you say, okay, how many takeaways did you get from it that you'll use at the end of this weekend on Monday, when you have your first client in the first thing back, or your first workout back if you're just a fitness enthusiast, and they say one or two things or three or four things, well, it's like, well, you just listen to six speakers talk for an hour each. There's got to be more than that, and
Yeah.
it's a shame when there's not.
Yeah, you just spent hundreds and hundreds of dollars for a weekend symposium, and I call it honeymooning. Though for the next week, you'll see all these attendees with their clients or whatever in the gym, and they're all, again, monkey see, monkey do, what they learned in the symposium. But that's a honeymoon period. What are they doing with that information 6 months from now, 8 months from now, 10 months from now? So
Right.
I think among wannabe experts, there's two blind spots that never the twain shall meet, and what I mean by that is there's academic chest pounding. You should follow me because look at all the material I've studied and all the studies I've shown you. And then there's physique chest pounding. You should follow me because check it out. Like, I'm awesome. Look how awesome I look. Right. And both of those things leave tremendous blind spots. And I think you've done a really good job at just by being authentic. And that's something I lecture about a lot these days. People who lack authenticity can't see the real thing in other people. Right. So you've done a great job at, like, hey, here's the knowledge, but at the same time, here's all the pretensions that go along with that. The stuff I've read of yours is I can see why people say you and I speak the same language in terms of what we say, because a lot of the onus, I stopped thinking the consumer a long time ago. I stopped believing that the consumer deserved better. And after a while, I started blaming the victim, because if the consumer doesn't want to make themselves smart, and if they want to keep having the same goal every January 1st for the next 10 years that they've had for the last 10 years, then that's on them to a certain extent, especially now with the saturation of markets. But let me just change gears, because there's something else I want to, a level of experience and how we can impart. Experience is the greatest teacher. Would you agree?
I do agree with that.
So you had a pretty severe injury, right?
Yeah, I did.
So let's talk about how it happened, but what it taught you, and what that allowed you to teach to other people. Because I had two discs removed from my back way back in 2000, and being horizontal for almost a year, like there was a lot of mental, emotional, and physical lessons there that I've been able to, layer on year after year since then. But talk about your injury and what it taught you, and what you've been able to use to teach others.
Yeah. So let me see, 2017 April now, I suffered a bilateral patellar tendon rupture. So for people who don't know what that is, it's basically on both of my knees at the same time. I disconnected both of my patellar tendons below the kneecap.
Oh,
So that will cause the quads to pull the kneecaps right up like Venetian blinds, and so my kneecaps were sitting on my thighs.
how did that
Uh,
happen?
so I was playing basketball, and it was a perfect storm of a lot of silly decisions. I was wearing a brand new pair of shoes. I was playing on a concrete floor. I hadn't played for a while as well, and I was insufficiently warmed up. So all that stuff was definitely contributing to it. And so I did my brief warm up, and I threw a couple down as well, and so I was feeling pretty good. And I went up for a lob, went up to catch a lob for an alley oop, and my body said no. So it was on the takeoff that they both decided to go on me. Can't remember how I even landed, but I ended up on my side, and then it was the whole 911 thing and everything like that.
Both.
So
I
it
can't
was,
believe that. Both.
yeah,
That's like, you hear about a patellar rupture. It's usually one. The only time I've heard both of that happening is back in the day, the bodybuilders I knew who were, more, they weren't very smart about their training, would try to keep up to each other anyway. More than one were doing squats with 500 or 600 pounds, and one knee blew, and
yeah,
instead of dumping the weight, they automatically tried to, like, it shifted to the other leg, and the other knee blew.
right, right.
In basketball, that's just strange, right?
Yeah, well, I guess it was just the explosion of that first because I took off with two legs, right? And so just that explosive loading phase, it just decided that it was too much. It was too much for the joint to handle, and so there you go.
What kind of
Um,
recovery went into that? You've already talked about lessons, but we'll break it down. What kind of recovery did that necessitate? Surgery, obviously, right?
yeah, so knee constructive or reconstructive surgery to both knees. I had a surgeon on each knee working at the same time. And yeah, then it was about 3 months in, oh, let me see, it was about 2 months in a wheelchair. And then it was another month and a half or so in full braces and with crutches and everything like that. And yeah, it was quite some time before I could like truly just like actually like walk around unassisted again. So it was quite the ordeal. And again, like you were saying, being horizontal for quite a long time and so on, it's very interesting and very you learn a lot of lessons in terms of what you should kind of act like, number one, how you should approach your training, number two, how you should approach a lot of different things. And so I definitely got a lot of takeaways from that experience, which I wouldn't want anyone to have to go through, but also which I wouldn't want to repeat myself either.
And any limitations since then? Any things you can't do that you've been able to sort of like, oh, if I can't do them, it doesn't mean everyone else has to do them either.
Right. So first of all, as far as my recovery's gone, the limitations that I had are like there still are. I need a longer warm up for anything lower body related, like a much longer warm up. It's been 2 years, but there are things that cause a little bit of tightness and swelling and this and that. So that's still a factor. And I don't at this point think that it'll ever truly go away, but based on the severity of the industry, or sorry, of the injury, I'm okay with that. And again, I could run, jump, I can dunk a ball again, I can sprint, I can do anything that I want, I can squat over three. So all those things are still there. It's just a matter of how much prep work and how much volume and how intensely I can go after it, right?
So
Um,
prehab, you're talking about prehab now, right?
Right. So just preparing for the actual workout itself, that takes a little bit longer. I need more sets with the empty bar when I'm squatting. I need more sets at 95 pounds when I'm squatting. I need all of that stuff. I need more mobility work in there as well. I can't go into things cold anymore or at all if I needed to or if I wanted to. Now, with that said, I did find that during what I did after I got injured and I got finally back able to walk again and so on, and I could do it without braces and everything like that. First day back, I went to the gym. And first day I went to the gym. And when I went to the gym, it really forced me for, from that point, which was in July and onwards, to find, because I couldn't bend my knees even to 90 degrees yet. And so I had to find a lot of different substitutes for a lot of movements that I was very comfortable doing, like when I would go and do back or front squats, and when I'd go and deadlift and so on. Well, all of a sudden I was like, okay, well, what am I going to do? This is not a factor anymore. It's not a possibility. So what am I going to do? And it made me understand just how important, even though I'd been doing it before, how important things like calisthenics, mobility work, body weight training, and other unilateral training and other things like that were for just day-to-day general health and wellness of a human body. And we can get stuck in this rabbit hole of only doing these big lifts, and strength and conditioning experts everywhere, me included, huge proponents of squat, dead, overhead press, all those movements. But that's not all there is to it. And if we're only working out in the sagittal plane, and if we're only thinking about progressive overload all the time, and we're only thinking about those kinds of movements, we're only going to get more skill pertinent to the exercise in question. And that doesn't do anything to really address our connective tissue as well as we could, doesn't do as much to address our mobility in a true way as well as we could. They're all things that can very much help it. But if we are not paying attention to other planes of motion, if we're not paying attention to other forms of resistance and so on, then we're going to run into a little bit of a hole, especially if we want to go and do something athletic that requires a lot more variability in the blink of an eye. And there you go. I'm sure that contributed to why I got injured too.
Yeah, a lot of the times the limitation in thinking, especially amongst, like overload being the only thing to practice, is after several years, you're doing more and more for less and less, right? Because the body understands that level of adaptation. You can't really, I mean, how much, I've said this in articles before, how much more volume can you add before it's just ridiculous? Like, what are you going to do, 60 sets body part? Like, so if you keep thinking along one single train of thought, like lift more, then think that through to the end result, and you see how ridiculous it is. Because like unilateral training, I love that, and that goes back to some research I learned, when I first started, cross innervation, right? So let's say you only blew out one knee. If you train the contralateral limb, you would maintain some strength from cross innervation and things like that. So, but in terms of what you just said, everything applies, right? But in terms of the kind of clientele you deal with, how many of them, like, where do you decide the person needs more mobility and less strength training, or they need more body part training and less strength training, or they need less bodybuilding kind of training and more mobility training? Like, how do you differentiate,
I like to look at two things. Number one, their real age. That's a kind of a factor in itself, and also their training age. Both of those things, a lot of people think they're the same thing, but they're different. Because
biological age, it's called, right? Yeah.
Right. So biologically, somebody might be 45 years old, but they might have only been training for a year and a half so far. And a first timer who's in the gym at 43 lifting weights, I'm going to approach that differently than a first timer who's in the gym at 18 or 20 lifting weights. There are a lot of different imbalances they might have accrued over the course of time. There might have been injuries that they accrued, much more likely over the course of time. They have to fix a lot of weaknesses or weak links, and then there's going to be more wear and tear on their joints in the first place too, just because of time. So things like that I'll look at. Their real age, number one, their training age, number two, and I'll regulate it adequately or modify appropriately based on that alone. When you have somebody who's very experienced in the gym, who you want to burn body fat or build muscle or whatever, then you can take a little bit more of a systematic, structured weight training based approach compared to somebody who might be completely immobile, who might not have practiced any kinds of movements, and who might not even have patterning right in the first place, who might be the same age, who might be in their 40s or in their 50s or something like that. Well, if they're working a desk job for the last 22 years or something, chances are they're going to have a lot more restrictions in terms of their movement capabilities, and they might be lacking coordination because they're not too sharp on that, and they might be lacking a lot of other skills that they need from a grassroots level to build. So I will go the route of, getting them to understand their body, first of all, through those kinds of movement patterns, dynamic mobility drills, and so on. Very lightly loaded weight exercises. And if their goal is conditioning, which most of the time, the clients that I see, that's a lot of the time their goal, I'll go a lot of body weight staples with them. I'll go a lot of routes like that.
Let me interrupt you for a second. Now, when the client says conditioning, do they really mean physical conditioning, or do they mean cosmetic differences?
They often mean, it depends on who it is. They often could mean fat loss, which is the most common one they mean when they say that. Or they could actually mean like they want to get, healthier, better moving joints, better conditioned overall, where their muscles can actually have more endurance to them, and they can get a little bit stronger at the same time, and they're more athletic than they were before. So that's the way that I mean it when I say conditioning, and that's the way that I approach it too.
Yes, and you mentioned something there, just sort of in passing, that I'll refer to, that I call paradigm blindness, which is among experts we tend to see. Well, there's two things I want to discuss there. You mentioned the training age of a client and capability levels, which go into assessment, which is, I mean, that should be a priority among any of us. And a lot of the times, what they're comfortable doing, they don't even realize is from years and years of their body sort of referring what they're not doing, and then their body is sort of adopting to something that isn't necessarily the best thing for them, but it's because they're sitting all day, they're doing all these things. So what they're not comfortable doing is what they should be doing, and because they're not comfortable doing it, they don't do it, and then the imbalances get bigger and bigger, and the susceptibility to injury becomes greater and greater, and then you've got all kinds of biometrics that become problematic if they're overweight and things like that. But so yeah, that's pertinent. But separate from that is what I call paradigm blindness. So if you look at some of the experts in the industry, they tend to associate that their way of expertise is the right way for all the clients that come to them. So they don't really adopt to the client. Like there's certain experts that you and I both know, and I'm not criticizing them, but they will look through a very narrow window, and then they'll say the solution to any problem, including weight loss, is bench, squat, deadlift, overhead press. Bench, squat, deadlift, overhead press. You probably know who I'm talking about. No cardio. And they're obviously experts at those lifts. Like they've analyzed it to a degree where you're like, wow, this guy knows those lifts. But knowing those lifts doesn't necessarily translate into helping client A, client B, client C, like you said. So you see a lot of paradigm blindness in the people you cross paths with, like.
Yes, I do. A lot of trainers will get to the place where all of a sudden their average Joe client is trying to be a power lifter when they're not trying to be a power lifter. So everything starts revolving around what this person's overhead press, what this person's deadlift numbers are, what this person's squat is, and they're working on those things week after week after week. We haven't talked about a whole lot of things that could factor into why those movements might not even be great choices for them in the first place.
Exactly.
And that there are other variations of those movements that still train the pattern, but in a much more ideal way for that person and his biomechanics or his leverages or his injury history and so on, so that it'll accommodate those lifts and make them actually make him take to those lifts better. So I was in that same sort of place for a while. I'd say up until about maybe about 5 years ago or so, where I really believed that strength training, those big lifts, was a serious key towards development and so on. And in certain veins it is, but in many veins it's not. And when you consider the client and the person that you're working with on an individual level, it makes you start thinking twice about whether or not you're going to add it. And if you do add it, what variation of it are you adding? And third of all, how much volume are you applying to it all? So what other things could really, what's the term that I'm looking for? What other things could maybe make better use of your time and better use of a client's time in order to help him towards whatever his goals are, and just overall under the umbrella of getting fitter and healthier for that person and improving them?
Yeah, no, all great points. Because a lot of the times, those movements can just as well be an impediment as they are a contribution.
Yep.
That I've seen that over and over again, and you see that kind of application. And I'll even get again consumer blindness also, where people will write and they'll say, "My overall goal is this, but I want to be able to do this many chin-ups," and I'm like, "Why?" That has absolutely no bearing on what you're after at all, other than you read it somewhere like that.
Right.
You should be able to do this many chins, and you should be able to do,
Right.
I mean, and I always go to the example when I was 260 pounds, all jacked up and juiced up and everything, 10% body fat. I sucked at chins, but I had one of the best backs in bodybuilding. So it was like, decide why and where you're going with that. And there's also demographic keys to look at too, right? Like I shudder when I have people 40 and above telling me that they're doing CrossFit. Then I'm like,
Right.
whoa, like the last thing you want to be doing is that kind of ballistic nonsense for no apparent reason other than to exhaust yourself, right? And I think that carryover, we kind of just briefly touched over it when we first started, but there's a lot of theories out there of which I happen to believe in, that a lot of these non-contact related injuries in professional athletics now is because of the intrusion of a CrossFit style of training into off-season and on-season training with professional athletes. And just as an example, like, God, my heart goes out to Kevin Durant. Just, why does an injury like that happen? And the conjecture so far is that the basketball season is just too long. There's way too many games for athletes that are functioning at that level of performance. And I'm like, yeah, 100% agree. But that's why their training needs to be different than, let's exhaust you some more over here. Let's exhaust you some more over here. It's just like, because you're in your 20s to 30s, you should just pound, 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 pound. So
Right.
go ahead, take that and run with it for a minute.
I think that the Kevin Durant situation was, he should have never gone back into that series based on, I feel like the initial injury that he had that kept him out of the playoffs in the first place,
Strength.
wasn't.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's what it was. I feel like it was being sort of like, taken down a notch in terms of what the public knew about it. And I think that if he goes from a strained calf, quote unquote, to a ruptured Achilles, yeah, I don't know about that. I feel like, and it wasn't even on some big, he planted and he tried to change directions, and that was it. So I don't know if that would really become of that. I think that the first injury was a little bit more severe than they were letting on. No, with that said, yeah, the rigors of, if you think about what an NBA player's schedule or just their 9 months when they're playing is like, you practice in the morning and then you have your game or whatnot. You're training when you're not practicing, and then you're on a plane, and then you go to your another place to sleep in a strange bed, a hotel room, and you don't get too much sleep. You might have to deal with a time zone change and so on. And that's what you kind of deal with for 82 times over, or at least 41 times over when you're away, And so that in itself it's very, very demanding on somebody's body and so on. So if the
And that
training
doesn't
methods,
that doesn't even talk about the rigors of the actual sport. Like, that just talks about the structure,
that's a
right?
lifestyle, yeah.
But then the rigors of actual agility training, planting a leg, jumping how you injured yourself, all these other things that factor into the actual game circumstance and the rigors involved. It's like all the more reason to back the F off of training. If we're going to have professional athletes who are at the highest work capacity possible and genetic capacity, if we're going to have them endure these long seasons, then an off season has to start being an off season. This macho bravado stuff that says there is no off season, all that's doing is shortening careers. In my opinion, we see professional athletic careers now getting shorter and shorter and shorter. And I think part of the reason is, in the old days, there really was an off season. The season was over. Guys took 8 or 12 weeks off. They got fat. They drank beer. They ate cake. And then that's what preseason was for, to get yourself back in shape. And I think there's value and lessons in that we just don't heed anymore, because, if you show up at training camp not in shape, you're not going to get a look.
Yeah, I actually that's something in not in quite in the professional athletic side of things, but just in terms of like the training game side of things that I like to talk about and I like to write about as well. It's like, it's sort of okay if you miss a workout or if you're not beating yourself up over missing a PR or something like that. And taking a week to deload or taking a week off the gym altogether or more than a week off the gym, it can do you some good. There are a lot of stories that a lot of experienced strength coaches and trainers will go and tell about the fact that they or their client or someone PR'd huge after taking all this time away from either a lift or from the gym altogether.
Yep.
So there's got to be something that's to be said about the importance of rest and recovery and not trying to force feed these movements or force feed a certain level of intensity to your programming or whatnot that you can't accommodate, especially considering these people are getting paid millions of dollars just to play ball, and that's what the priority of their life is. Meanwhile, there are people who are, Bob from accounting and Bill from finance and so on, who are trying to have a 60-hour per week job, and they're 15 years older than a retired basketball player is, and so on, and they're trying to be just as intense because that's what they see all the time, and live up to strength standards like you mentioned with the pull-ups thing. These are things that need to be sent down to the crypt. We can't keep on referring to these as our measures to measure up to or to base our programming or our training ideals around, because yeah, it's hurting people. And it's great to have a 600-pound deadlift, but what's your shelf life going to be compared to somebody who has, I don't know, a 400-pound deadlift and they can do other things too at the same time, right?
Yeah,
So, yeah.
I'm fortunate because I don't advocate any of that stuff. In even in my first book, The Abel Approach, I've always talked about range of success and rep ranges, and I don't even deal with clients. I don't even mention PRs. I don't even mention like if unless you're competing in some kind of sport where a PR is relevant, you shouldn't even know what your max bench squat and deadlift is because you should never be doing max singles anyway. So like it would
Right.
just like how does that behoove anybody? And
Right.
then in terms of deloading and stuff and active recovery, I always I don't you probably didn't read my articles on this, but I call it the base hit mentality. Instead of going to the workout like you're getting up to the plate and you're swinging for the fences trying to hit a home run, just put the ball in play. Keep the inning
Right.
alive, right? Consistency is more important than intensity. And a lot of the people they don't get that context, right? So, I'm feeling burned out. I had a 60-hour work week. It's, our busy season at work and I can't sleep and I'm stressed. It's like, okay, well, go to the gym with consistency is more important than intensity. Back off the pace, back off the load. We call it the base hit strategy. Just get a base hit.
Yep.
Just get up to the plate and, keep the inning alive, right? Until such a time where you start sleeping better, recovering better. At least your active recovery keeps the neurological patterns ignited, keeps them alive without leading to exhaustion, right? So I think finally as well, we're finally getting over that CrossFit influence where, you have to leave the gym, where you got to sit in your car for 10 minutes before you can drive. Like we're fine. I
Yep.
think we're finally getting past that kind of nonsense, right? I don't know if you're,
Well,
but
yeah, 100%. I saw, especially in like the late 2000s, early 2010s, all that sort of time, it was workouts were about this big conquest. It was about trying to walk in and then crawl out. It was about trying to, just show Monday who's boss and all these different quotables that you would
yeah,
see in terms of fitness motivation and so on. And
all
then
it
with
takes
social.
is all it takes is all you've got.
Exactly. Pain is weakness leaving the body, and on and on and on it would go, right? And with the blast off of things like Instagram and social media and those forums, those probably just became more rampant because of it. It was more eyes were on those kinds of things. And, like one thing sort of just fed into the other, into the other, into the other, and the domino effect started happening where people thought that this is what would be all about. Lately, I actually believe that movements like body positivity, which there are caveats with that too, but movements like that and movements like health at every size and you name it, those kinds of things actually sort of help in their own way to neutralize a lot of that thinking because of the fact that it's showing that, being that super duper incredible athlete or somebody who stops at nothing to obsess over their training and so on, Well, that's not cool, and that's not healthy, and it's not sustainable either, right? And so in that regard, I actually have a lot of respect for it because of the fact that it keeps people a little bit more grounded in their thinking and thinks of things a little bit more bigger picture and more geared towards health and less geared towards the numbers and the performance and what you're doing to crush this deadlift workout today and all that stuff. So yeah, kudos to it for that.
Yeah, no, and yeah, thank God we're moving away from that, especially because, the generational aspect. You're how old?
I'm 32.
Yeah, so you're still a baby compared to, like, I deal with a demographic now that's aging, right? So I wrote a book, Physique After 50, and the aging proposition. And one of my propositions there is, as we cross 50 and sarcopenia affects everybody, doesn't matter, your genetics or your pharmaceuticals or whatever, that's just a reality. So the mindset has to switch from, it used to, when you're young, you can work out for how it makes you look and then how it makes you feel as a secondary benefit. But as you age, you've got to turn that upside down and work out for what you're saying. Work out for how it makes you feel and then how it makes you look as a secondary benefit. So we got to sort of switch the mindset to more workable propositions, especially as people age. And also, like, there's way too many trainers that aren't doing lifestyle assessments, like you've referred to several times, right? You have an over 40 person who goes from being detrained to trained to untrained to trained. So they're never consistent enough to develop a real solid work capacity that you can work with. But they're professional people, and that's the reason for that. So they're putting in, like you said, 60 hours a week and stuff. And they go to these trainers who just assign them whatever the trainer is doing, right? Well, here's what I'm doing to get all jacked, and here's what you should do too. So they're assigning them 7 days of cardio twice a day, and this stuff that's not even remotely sustainable, let alone is it going to help, because their cortisol levels are just going to go through the roof. And then they're not even, like you said, they're not even adapting. Well, are these movements even right for this person? Like, I'm thinking of a housewife I have right now who came to me years ago with eating issues and weight issues and, in her 40s, but running a house, working for the family business, this and that. And we just dialed it back to a level of reality. There was no PRs. There was no squat, deadlift, bench press. There was just a lot of body weight stuff and a lot of, you gotta eat, you gotta breathe, you gotta move,
Yep.
Susan Powder kind of stuff from the 90s. And then boom, completely changed, her weight. She looks 20 years younger, like 30 years younger even. So I think there's a lot of, like, trainer sort of, this is the, like you mentioned when we first started this is the vogue trend. Everybody's doing this right now. So let's all jump on that bandwagon without even assessing who our client is.
Yeah, it's actually really good that we're talking about this and that this is going to go on the air because of the fact that, where I'm from anyway, here in Toronto, the 40 plus, we keep referring to these 40 plus and these older people and so on. That is what is going to make up the majority of most trainers' clientele base.
Yep.
And every trainer's pipe dream, I don't know, I can only speak from personal experience because it was my pipe dream for a long time, and it's pretty much any young coach's pipe dream is to work with top athletes. They want to work with athletes. And
let me just pause. Let me just pause right there, because that's a comical thing to me, because I lived that. That wasn't my goal. It ended up happening because of who I was before social media and the dinosaur age. I was in all the magazines and all that. And I had professional athletes, and I called it glorified babysitting. I hated it. You know what I mean?
Well, there's a limited perspective, I'm sure, of what it really takes to train a sports athlete and what it involves. But what I was getting at with that is that because that's the pipe dream of so many young coaches, they don't realize that that's probably for 90% of that sort of world, that's not where the sustainable income is going to come from, where you could make a career out of this. The people who you can make a career out of this based on is going to be the ones who are stable. They might be a little bit older. They might have a family already, so they're not moving around all over the place. They have a career, all those things, so they can afford the luxury that is personal training.
Disposable income.
Disposable income. So personal training isn't cheap. It's not something that anybody can pay for everywhere you turn. And so what kind of people or what kind of client base are you going to try to attract in order to make yourself earn a sustainable living from that?
Let's talk about that for a minute, because that's I don't cover that very often, and yet I always get the coach. I want to be what I want to get to where you are. I want to do what you do. I want to, because I've lived a semi-retired life for 30 years, right? My whole career has basically been semi-retired, but I designed that life. Are you familiar with the term red ocean, blue ocean?
No.
Okay, so there's a marketing wave. I think it's Russell Brunson. I'm not sure if I'm saying his name. He talks about the demographic of success in any career: red oceans, blue oceans, and I experienced that. And what I mean by that is, I'll take bodybuilding, competitive bodybuilding as the example, because that's the world I'm from, the hardcore world. And you kind of referred to it in Instagram and all the rest of it. How do I make a career? How do I become successful? How do I become a Lee Boyce or a Scott Abel? And it's like, you have to understand the difference between the red ocean and the blue ocean. And what he refers to there is, the red ocean is where all the sharks have congregated and they're eating all the fish in that food area, so the water turns red with blood. So if you're going to try to enter that demographic, like you said in Toronto, the saturation of personal training, the top 1% will make 90% of the money, right? So that's a red ocean. What you want to try to do is find a demographic that's a blue ocean, where there's no feeding frenzy yet. There's no blood in the water, right? And you do that by looking at niche markets. And one of the niche markets are people with disposable income. In bodybuilding, what I ended up finding out was, especially this day and age, someone wins a novice show, all of a sudden they're a coach, they're a trainer. So that water gets red real quick, because the people I coach, they start coaching people, they become the competition, and now we're all swimming in the same shark-infested waters, and we're all trying to feed on the same fish, none of whom have disposable income to begin with. Right? And even in my own career, one of the reasons, and like yourself, is you realize the value of exposure. So when I was in Toronto, everyone was all about winning competitions and this and that, and I was like, I could care less about that. I wanted to make it to Venice Beach on my own, which I did. I wanted to be in the magazines, which I was, but I did other things when I lived in Toronto. I showed up at Raptor games, Blue Jay games, hockey games, and I got exposure to the general public, which was blue waters. It wasn't shark infested with everyone trying to compete for the same dime. And I see that. I live in a really small town, but within 5 minutes of me, there's maybe 4 personal training studios. So, and they have to, that's red ocean, right? They're all trying to feed on the same local demographic, because no one's going to hire them from another country. No one's going to hire them from outside the 20-mile radius. So they're already in a red ocean, whereas I think you've discovered the blue ocean. I've discovered the blue ocean, but to get other people to understand the difference, like it's shark infested waters trying to be a personal trainer in an urban area that has, a million people, right? Because every gym, like the bigger gym chains where you're at, Good Life and Extreme and whatever other ones are around, they have a whole family of trainers in and of themselves. And then you've got, pocket demographics and this and that, and you've learned to go outside of that instead of having, the local red ocean as your population base. You've got a global blue ocean as your population base, and I think you've managed that, perfectly. Do you want to talk a little bit more about that?
So it was definitely my goal to, because I've always sort of wanted to go the route of trying to, I guess teach, for lack of a better term, or influence people in that way, where they actually learn more about training rather than just, okay, this guy can lift, or, I'm somebody who's only based on referrals from local clients and so on. And so my goal was to go the writing route. And so to me, I was always asking myself, like, what can I do to sort of set myself apart compared to, the next person who's local in my city, who's also a pretty good trainer and so on, right? And so my goal was to, start by writing. And so that's why I went that route. And number two, because yeah, like it's consumable by everybody around the world. And because of that, it creates that blue ocean situation where you're talking about, where there's a very, very much untapped potential in many different pockets of the world and different areas and different demographics where you can start building your name and also gaining credibility from it. And the cycle is going to repeat itself, because seeing that being out there is going to build credibility for you, but also having that on your resume is going to build credibility for anybody who sees that. So it works very in a sort of cyclical way, in a sort of round way, and that's why I really went after that. And that's just one piece of the pie in terms of the things that I've been trying to that I had been trying to do, and that have sort of shaped and framed the career that I've built so far. It's definitely a matter of just asking that question of what to do to set oneself apart, and what value are you sort of bringing to the industry, and why would somebody choose you versus the next guy right there who's got your skill sets too. And so
Yeah, you've done that.
there's a lot.
Yeah. Do you know who JC Santana is?
By name.
Yeah, so he's been on my podcast a gazillion times because, again, we speak the same language. So he's another one who understood Blue Ocean. He used to be with Perform Better and lecture with all the people. And then now he's got a whole market in China. He goes over there and does his certifications in China completely untapped. Nobody there, nobody. They provide the translators. He goes over, For me, I think the Blue Ocean was writing books. So, as much as I read your, when I first introduced you, all the big websites and magazines that you've contributed to, that's a Blue Ocean sort of mindset, right? And for me, Amazon number one best-selling author for every book I've launched, that's a Blue Ocean for me, right? And then to try to get people who want to make a living at personal training, you've got to present them with, well, do you want to compete against other personal trainers in your own hometown? Because what ends up happening, Lee, I don't know if you've seen this, but they end up devaluing themselves. Like, this personal trainer is charging $80 an hour, so I'll charge $70. And then the new guy comes in, he'll charge $60. And then the corporate gym sees all that, so they'll charge $45, but the personal trainer only gets $15. And then before you know it, they're teaching group classes for $10 a session. Now it's $5 a session. Then it's $2. It's like, you know what? I'm not going to devalue what I do and who I am. I'm going to get better and better, more expert. I'm going to read other experts. I'm going to apply what I know, and I'm never, ever going to devalue myself. And I see that all around me. It's like, you want to make a name for yourself in this game, but you're going to devalue everything you do? It's just contradiction.
See, there's to me, it's like there's a little bit of both sides of this, where I'm also a huge proponent of, charging your worth for one, and making sure there's got to be, like, if you think about any other industry, like if you hire an electrician, or you hire a lawyer, or you hire a dentist. That's a great example, actually. You go for dental work. And so, you might have a coverage through your benefits package or whatnot, or you might have coverage from the province or whatever. And so you'll still see, if you ask what that unit is actually worth, across the board, you're probably still going to see a certain finite range. Let's say it's between $90 and $110 per unit for getting a cleaning done, right? And so with that said, with personal training, it should really be no different. As a service in itself, it should be delivered for, there's going to be a baseline in terms of how much that luxury should cost for somebody. So when somebody goes and they have a skill set to charge way more than, whatever that number is, but then they go and try to beat the last price of the person who's, charging a cheaper amount and trying to bargain hunt and so on. And so they're charging $40, $30, $20 for a training session. Well, that doesn't just sell yourself short, but it's also devaluing the entire industry and what the expertise that is associated with what this industry has to offer, whether you're good or bad. What this expertise of this industry has to offer for somebody, it brings that down a whole lot, and that's not a good look for you, for me, for anybody who's also sharing a space in this industry. It's not a good thing. So
I'll present to you the opposite of that argument. For people, because I do online coaching, and for me, the upfront fee, because of the work I put in upfront with assessment and assignment and the rest of it, is $1,500. And oftentimes people will say, well, I would never pay that for an online coach. And I would say, good, you're not the money I'm after. There's people who want to dine at McDonald's 5 days a week, and there's people who want to dine at Ruth's Chris or Morton's of Chicago. And the difference also is, let's look at our industry, and let's use professional athletics as an example. The difference between a high school football coach and a Bill Belichick is millions and millions of dollars. But like you said, they understand the same structure of the game. They run practices and game plans the same way. But at some point, the cream rises to the top. And if you don't give yourself the opportunity and the agenda to do that, there's a reason I'm talking to Lee Boyce today, and I'm not talking to John Smith from Good Life. So take that and run with it, and then our hour is almost up. So, unfortunately,
I think that like the Belichick example, is a good one, because I think that a lot of trainers today, they don't give themselves the time and the experience to actually build the experience to make themselves the cream that rises to the top, because I believe that a lot of this is going to happen naturally too. And what I mean by that is, I think that if you're good, and if you care about the industry, and you care about the craft, and you care about your clients themselves, and you're putting your energy and your effort into it, well, that's not going to go unnoticed. It's only a matter of time before this gets noticed, and so on. This gives yourself, it opens up doors for you. It gives yourself opportunities, and so on. And if you don't, then you should be questioning yourself, if not anything else. So a lot of people, especially because of the fact that you can be an overnight highly followed person thanks to social media these days, you got 22, 23-year-olds who want the world. They want to train the pro athletes. They want to be followed by 100,000 people on Instagram and social media and so on. And they might get a whole lot of traction in those regards, but in the blink of an eye, all their stuff is useless, just because of the fact that they don't have any footprint that they're really leaving on the industry as a whole. And the reason you can't really blame them, they're too young. They're not experienced enough. No one's really, fewer and fewer people are really of the mentality of putting your head down and grinding and actually doing the right thing, for lack of a less condescending term, knowing your place in the industry as somebody who's more of a learner than you are a teacher at this point in your industry and in your career. And that doesn't mean that somebody should ever really flip that, but as time goes on, you'll have more to share, but in the beginning phases, you have less to share and more to take in. And that's sort of going to go a long way in terms of just what kinds of association that you're going to get as far as professional interactions and so on, and what your ego or your attitude is going to speak towards the way that you are in the industry too. So I do think that taking the time to build your career by way of getting experience, getting in front of as many clients as possible, working with as many demographics as possible, biting the bullet and working for the good life. So working for the extreme fitnesses and so on, because it will give you that experience too. It's going to be endlessly invaluable to your development phase as a trainer, and that's when you're going to be able to start making decisions that are nicer problems to have. For example, the blue water, was it blue sea?
Red ocean, blue ocean.
Blue ocean, that was it. So being able to find those blue oceans and really specialize or find the niche and so on, where you can now be the big fish and you could influence others. So I really do believe that this is a very unique industry, and that as we spoke at the beginning, that experience kind of rules everything, and anecdote trumps a whole lot of other things. And if you don't give yourself the time to build that experience and have those experiences and that anecdote to actually work based on, then you're shooting yourself in the foot, because you're trying to skip too many steps, and that's not how this works. If you talk to any of the top strength coaches in the game, they're all going to say that there's no real secret to all this, right?
Yeah, and I think if there is a secret, it's trying to teach the consumer that there are no secrets, and it's trying to get them to unlearn marketing hacks that they think are knowledge. And I think one of the things that we're both pointing at here is the modern youngster who wants to make a career thinks he can do it in a hurry. So I talked about this in my book, How to Be a Great Online Coach, and it's the problem with the expert who wants a sustainable career in this is they pursue knowledge an inch deep and a mile wide, where real expertise goes an inch wide but a mile deep, because there's so much to consider, right? That's why you've got to read, Santana and Ripito and all these people, and Dan John and whoever else. Like, you've got to up your game, but it's not just information is not knowledge. Einstein said that. It's not about who can gather the most information. If it was, then a Google search would make us all experts.
Right.
So at some point, you've got to, and we've got to, impart applicable knowledge in a way that's reproducible and self-evident. So, and I think you've done a great job of that. And I think you're swimming in pretty much blue oceans, maybe a little bit of red here and there, but I could talk to you all day. Maybe we'll have you back on, but I don't want to waste too much of your time on a holiday. So thanks for being with me on Smarter Sculpted Physique, and hopefully we'll have you on again. Anything you want to impart, parting words, where can people find you and all that? We'll put it in the show notes, of course, but...
Yeah, sure. So Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, I do have social media, and they're all at Coach Lee Boyce. That's my handle for all three. You'll find great training information there. Hit my website, leeboycetraining.com, and you'll find a lot of blogs that talk about things I see in the industry. So that's a little bit of a different stroke compared to what a lot of other training blogs are about. I don't really talk about exercise content on there. So that'll be good reads. And you can always follow me on those forms of social media, and that'd be great. Stick with what you know, trainers. Just stick with what you know, and you'll be fine.
And you just even mentioning your blog, that's another example of blue oceans, because what you said, you don't write about what everyone else is writing about. And trust me, folks, you're listening and watching this, go and read his blogs, because they're in-depth and they're things that'll make you go, oh, I never thought of it that way. And that's what it should be about, is creating new ways of thinking, new lines of thinking. So, Lee, thanks for being on the show. I can see why everyone said I got to get you on. That two minds are thinking alike are twice as powerful as one. So, thanks for being on, and hopefully we'll have you on again.
Of course, thanks for having me.
All right, man. All the best, and happy Canada Day, and see you soon.
All right, you too.